Hello, welcome, Cabbage here. In War of the Visions, let's talk about elements. This is maybe a topic that a lot of people are interested in. It's not that big of a deal in Global yet. It's still not that big of a deal in JP, but it's definitely moving in that direction. So I'm just going to think aloud about how the game is treating elements, why it is a good move to sort of place more emphasis on elements, maybe some guesses on where it will go from here. There's not going to be any advice in this video about which units to level up. Or should you focus on certain elements for the future. But I think a good starting point for anybody would be to get a good attacker for every element, because that will be enough. For these first 2 months of EX jobs in JP, that's been more than enough. And yeah, just like in the early game, one strong attacker that can anchor your PvP team. It's going to be the same with EX jobs. But where JP is at now, new vision cards are targeting specific elements. Like the Phoenix vision card, you must be fire element to take advantage of either the party or the personal ability. And then there are the rotating hard difficulty equipment quests that have a mission that requires a mono element team. And then if you beat it with that element, you'll get just a +3 of that equipment, just as is. And then the tower, of course, favors different elements on different floors. I say favors, it does not require. And then as far as PvP, which we kind of saw in Asaruto's tournament, mono element teams are not like an easy win. So they're far from necessary for that as well. And then as far as equipment, there's no one that can get up to 100% resistance of any element, I think. So yeah, even in JP, it's still not required of anybody. Maybe one of the more concrete use cases for mono element teams would be raids, where you want to maybe solo auto level 100 rooms. Mono element teams are usually going to be best for that. But I have seen a few runs where there's a mix of elements and they're just focusing on the attack type. But that's more rare. And then although the title is talking about elements, we're also kind of just talking about the game as a whole. It's interesting to think about the age of the game and then how the meta has evolved since release. But quick lesson in mobile game design. But the first 6 months or the first year of a mobile game, things have to be kind of broad and shallow and simple. Like in War of the Visions, stats, numbers were the most important thing the first couple months. So that's why Stern and Orlando and Jiza were so dominant. They just had the range, or they had the damage, or they had the agility. And that was all that mattered at that time. And so in that very early stage of the game, elements almost didn't matter, and then people would just use anybody against anybody. And you could even have done that in the tower up to level 20 to a degree. But later, attack types and attack type resistances were highlighted. That especially got the spotlight with the release of Super Stern, and then people using a slash resistance Sasayaki to counter him. Oh, before that there was Evade. People discovered Evade maybe 2-3 months into the game. But now in JP again, with the vision cards, the PvP maps, the tower floors and stuff, they are stressing the importance of elements. But also another aspect that is kind of pushing more mono element teams is just more units per element. If you wanted to make a mono element team at launch, you would have maybe 1 or 2 UR units, and then you'd have to fill out the rest of your party with lower rarity units. And then also the youngness of the game explains why so many events in the first year emphasized dark and light units, and that also explains why there were so many dark and light units released. And then this is most likely the developer's plan, where there's a lot of room for this game to stretch, a lot of depth, different directions it can go. But by concentrating the first year in light and dark and slash, you're not asking too much of your players. You're not asking them to, spread their resources too thin. So everybody has a chance to compete at the highest levels, at least with PvE. And so that's why Shadow Lynx is a handout unit. That's why Gafgarion was a free unit. That's why Thancred was a quote-unquote free unit. That's why Ramza and Cecil were guaranteed gets. That's why both versions of Stern are similar. That's why Dwayne exists. And that's why Holy is one of the most important spells in this version of Final Fantasy. But with the first year ending, we're probably going to see the game open up from here. Maybe take on more attack types, more elements. And then in JP, we've seen sort of like mini metas. There was a time when ice was the strongest element, maybe water is the strongest element now, fire might be the strongest element later. But there's zero need to follow each of these mini metas, unless you have a lot of extra money and time. But still, mono element teams are not necessary. Maybe in a year or more they will become necessary. And people complain about how there's no content, but the same idea answers that as the slow move towards highlighting the elements, and that is that most users' accounts are not ready for what's coming in like half a year from now or a year from now. I say this all the time, and I always get pushback, but this is a young game still. Global is less than a year old, and I'm frankly surprised that we got stuff like the Tower and limited time guild battles so early in the life of the game. And the reason why we aren't ready for, more difficult content or like different modes and stuff is because, and I don't know if anybody's noticed, but it takes a lot of time to level up your guys. And then the developers can look at everybody's account and see everybody's power level, and they can release content that a good percentage of the user base can clear. There's no reason to design and release content that less than 1% of users can clear. And if they do that, they risk angering the 99%, and then you'll get calls of pay to win and cash grab. In JP, we recently got the 3-star Esper fights, and we got it at the timing that we did, because that was when the user base was ready to take those on. It wasn't a matter of the developers not thinking of the idea, because that's the most obvious idea in the world, but it was the developers holding it back until the players were ready. One interesting anecdote that illustrates a couple points is that the developers let drop in a live stream that they were implementing limited time guild battles with special rules, and they wanted to do an MR or lower rarity unit only guild battle. But they looked at the user base and they concluded that not enough people had enough leveled MRs to really make it work. So they went for male teams and female teams instead, and still there were people in trouble there. Like, I didn't have 3 male URs maxed. But this anecdote, it illustrates 2 things. One, that the developers have their eye on the progress of the users and are making content appropriate to that progress. And for another thing, it's surprising, that kind of bit of openness from the developers. We users rarely have that insight into why the developers make certain decisions, and I think even less frequently we hear about ideas that were never implemented. I'm really getting a sense, well, at least until late last year, that the developers are trying to be open with the users, because I think that's kind of expected of mobile games these days. Maybe like 3-4 years ago it wouldn't have been so possible, but now I think they're making an effort. And then I always knew that War of the Visions was going to someday move in the direction of element-centric stuff, because it happens in all games with elements. It's a good idea, it deepens gameplay, it spotlights lesser used units as different situations come up. It slows down power creep, actually, because you have all those little elements and attack types to build on individually. And so this current increase in element-specific vision cards is not surprising. And all games that have elements in them start broad, again, almost not even paying attention to the elements, and then they go more specific as time goes on, and then people's accounts get more robust. I could definitely see in another year most of the users that started at or around launch have pretty strong teams in all elements, and then we can start to see content that will require mono-element teams, and then that's going to be really interesting. Like, once you enter that area where everybody has a strong mono-element team, how do you, raise the challenge? How do you differentiate between different characters, like, within wind or within fire? How do you build challenges so that it's easier for certain characters but still beatable by others? And then this is not a personal wishlist video, but I would love like intricate fights against just one big boss, kind of like the chambers in Brave Exvius. I'm not a big fan of the stage being difficult just because there are a ton of guys that you have to wade through. I like it when it's just your party and then just one big guy. But yeah, War of the Visions is still in that kind of early, broad design phase, where it's just like, overwhelming numbers or like status effects are the biggest challenges of PvE. Later, again, when their accounts are more developed, we might get more technical challenges. Like needing to do things in a certain order, or like really relying on breaks or damage mitigation or something. But yeah, looking at the gradual broadening of the game systems and then the challenge in War of the Visions, it's kind of like a typical progression of a mobile game, gradually getting more sophisticated. And I feel like the rollout has been handled well, so that folks that started day one, they got to see each of these different facets of like character strengths or weaknesses, get the spotlight for a time, so that we could really learn the value of each. And then going forward, when the game is really humming, all of us older users, we're going to have the knowledge of each of those different aspects of each characters that we can use to teach new players, because it might be overwhelming for new players. But while the rollout that deepens the gameplay over time is typical of mobile games, in War of the Visions this all happened over the course of a year, which feels fast to me now that I think about it. I mean, I could imagine mobile games in like 2015 taking a full year on the equivalent of the evade meta, another full year on the resistances, another full year on elements. I think back on like Monster Strike, and like there was the year of the gravity barriers, the year of the warps, the year of the mines, went to blocks and magic circles and all that. But War of the Visions, it kind of became like very deep and then very sophisticated pretty quickly within a year. You look at the speed of the kind of the broadening of the challenge of the game, and then also the addition of like lots of quality of life updates, which I was very surprised to see in the first year. And then suddenly the quick arrival of EX jobs makes more sense. And before anyone calls me a white knight, I'm not saying that I like the early coming of EX jobs. I'm saying I understand it compared to the speed of everything else in the game. And I kind of understand why the company would make the pace faster overall, because maybe they're worried, since the mobile game landscape is so competitive and like mature, that new games these days just don't have the leeway to spend a year in this meta, then a year in this meta, and then a year in this meta. What might be happening is that the developers of War of the Visions are kind of sprinting to that sweet spot where the game is like 2-3 years old, where the gameplay has become very rich, there's lots of game modes, there's lots of rewards and help for new players, there's a great variety of units to choose from, while maintaining balance. A mobile game really doesn't kind of hit its stride until like 2-3 years in. And I'm not saying I'm 100% sure about this, but it kind of feels like that they are kind of dashing towards that sweet spot. I think back on Brave Exvius, the early days, the very, very early days, it was like the Brave Frontier collaboration, and then Transterra from Final Fantasy VI. But then the sweet spot came later with like Aigion, Chamber of Arms, the CG story units, and that was a really fun, balanced, paced out time. Assuming that this sprint to the sweet spot is real, now the question is why, and then what does the company do when they get there? As for the reason why, my guess is that it is to get the game to a place where it can stand shoulder to shoulder with more established games. But this is risky because you don't want to burn out your players, and you also don't want to bankrupt them. So far it seems like they are pulling that off. And then as for the company's plan for once they reach that sweet spot, my hope, of course, is that they will slow down at that point and then just maintain there. But my fear is that they will just blow right by, and then keep up with the same pace of EX jobs or an all-new Awakening form. You do have to keep people busy in your game, so slowing down is risky. You know, there will be people with all the units, and they will have all the equipment crafted, and they've beaten all the bosses in the game. But you also have to accommodate those hardcore players, while not alienating the average players, while also keeping the bar to entry low for new and casual players. Again, I would not want that job of trying to balance all of that. But yeah, that's about it, really. In conclusion, I think we're seeing War of the Visions being handled well, kind of in the tried and true way of, you know, over time expanding the complexity of the game. But I feel like we're seeing it at a faster pace than games like, you know, from 3-4 years ago. And it might be because they want to catch up to the games that are already on the market. But all things considered, I feel like balance has been maintained. It's still an expensive game if you want it to be, but yeah, the balance is there. The gameplay is there, the room for experimentation is there, so yeah, I'm feeling good about the game, I'm feeling good about the direction. It'll be interesting to see how it goes this coming year. Okay, I think that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again. Take care.
はこれは無理はするなよ。力を
修復します。
まだまだ。甘いね。そら
死になさい。
甘いね。本気を出すまでもなかったな。